When I told my daughter-in-law I needed money for eye surgery, she coldly replied, "Your health is your own responsibility. Handle it yourself. My husband's money is mine." I just smiled, then stopped the $3,000 monthly transfer to her family. I also canceled the authorized credit card, used to pay off her parents' luxury SUV loan. Just 30 days later, my son's entire family started calling me non-stop, desperately pleading for help. But by the time they realized what they had lost and could never get back, it was too late. If this story grips you, tell me where you are watching tonight, your city or country. I genuinely appreciate every comment and your time spent here. Before we continue, a brief note. Some details in this story have been dramatized. Names and backgrounds are fictional, but the message behind this narrative is what truly matters. I spent 35 years as a railroad engineer. A job that taught me the most important lesson has nothing to do with engines. It taught me, read the room long before touching any dials. You walk into an engine room, and before checking a single gauge, you already know something is off. You feel it in the air. Pressure hums through the floorboards beneath your boots. A frequency slightly off. A vibration that does not belong. The moment I pulled my truck into my son's driveway on Easter Sunday, I caught that off-key frequency. I parked behind a silver SUV I had never seen before and sat in my truck for a moment. Weeds choked the flower beds by the porch. The left side gutter hung loose from the fascia board. I mentioned it to Patrick back in January. Nobody came to fix it. Sitting in my truck at the curb, I could see it clear as day without getting out. Reaching over, I picked up a box from the passenger seat. I spent 2 weeks crafting it in my workshop back in Harlan, Kentucky. Inside, wrapped in an old piece of flannel, lay a model steam locomotive. I repainted from scratch. Deep green and gold, 1940s style. Using wood carving tools, I etched Sam's initials into the bottom of the cab. The very same tools I used to carve Dorothy's name into a cabinet when we moved to Harlan. Sam is 10 this year. Obsessed with trains just like I was at his age. Just like my father before me. Some things pass down through a family like electric current through wire. Before I could even knock, Chloe opened the front door. She had a knack for appearing at just the right moment, almost as if she spent her time lurking behind the curtains. Wearing a robin egg blue silk shirt and neatly pressed trousers, dark hair pinned up, her smile vanished as quickly as a wave hitting the shore. "Ah," she said, "you made it." "Traffic through Lexington was smooth enough," I replied. She stepped back. She did not offer to take the box. The dining room was already packed. Gary Baxter sat right at the head of my family's dining table. In the 8 years since his daughter married my son, I had spoken to him less than a dozen times. He wore a pressed sport coat over a collared shirt, skin deeply tanned, the kind of tan from a man who spent more time in casino parking lots than outdoors. He did not even look up when I walked in. Helen Baxter was small, well-practiced at staying quiet, sitting beside him with hands folded and eyes glued to her plate, reflecting that specific quiet women learn after decades of keeping their mouths shut for quiet's sake. Then Sam came thundering down the stairs. He charged to the bottom step, slid across the hardwood floor in his socks, grabbed the banister, and grinned up at me. That gap-toothed smile, only a boy missing 2 front teeth could pull off. Wearing a dinosaur shirt and sweatpants, hair pointing in 4 directions, he was the best thing I had seen all week. "Grandpa, Arthur!" He ran up to my waist, and I caught him with one arm while balancing the box with the other. Crouching down, I handed him the package. He held it with both hands, giving it a gentle shake the way kids do when guessing what is inside without wanting to break it, then pulled back the flannel to reveal the deep green and gold locomotive. His whole face lit up. Eyes wide, he clutched the train tight against his chest, like a priceless treasure that might vanish if let go. Then he turned and dashed straight back upstairs, before any adult in the room could say a word about thank you notes or table manners. I stood up, smiling. Behind me, Chloe's voice came low and flat. He could have said thank you. He did just fine, I told her, stepping forward to find my seat. Patrick was already seated, pouring sweet tea into a glass he had barely touched. My son is 41, with his mother's chin and his mother's eyes, but facing the people across the table tonight, he lacked every bit of his mother's backbone. He topped off my glass before I even asked. I thanked him, and he gave a quick nod. His eyes held mine for no more than 2 seconds. I recognized that look, the same expression from when he was 14 and drove my lawnmower into a ditch, spending an entire dinner deciding whether to tell me. He had something on his mind tonight, stuck in that exact same state. Cautious, quiet, hoping the issue would not come up. Halfway through the meal, I decided to bring it up myself. The cataract in my left eye worsened faster than my optometrist expected. 3 weeks ago, he told me in a flat, matter-of-fact tone that without surgery before the end of the year, my vision would deteriorate severely. He had delivered that kind of news 1,000 times, skipping any sugarcoating. The procedure itself was routine outpatient stuff. 45 minutes. Local anesthesia, done at a surgery center 2 towns over. The problem was a $5,000 gap between what my supplemental health insurance covered and what the center required up front. They would not schedule the date until that sum was settled. I set my fork down and looked at Patrick. The money I usually transfer to you every month. I need to hold on to it, I said casually. The eye doctor says I need that cataract surgery sooner than expected. Insurance leaves about a $5,000 gap. I figure using this month's transfer will cover it. The dining room went quiet. That specific silence when everyone stops chewing at once, but tries not to get caught doing it. Chloe set her knife and fork down on the edge of her plate with deliberate precision, like delivering a prepared statement. She looked at me, eyes devoid of warmth, carrying the flat, detached calm of someone reading off policy. Your health is your own responsibility, she said. Your money is yours. Patrick's money is mine. Gary Baxter let out a short snort through his nose, the sound of a man hearing something he deemed completely reasonable. Helen pressed a napkin to her lips, studying her plate. Patrick stared intently at the small glass jar of tulips in the center of the table, as if those flowers were the most important thing in the world right now. I looked at my son. My son looked at the flowers. I picked up my fork again. Cutting a piece of chicken, I chewed slowly. I told myself I was 68 years old, and I had survived far worse than a tense dinner table. I stayed another 20 minutes, refilled my water glass. I told Gary his story about the neighbor's truck was interesting, simply because that was easier than explaining why it was not. When I finally walked out to my truck and backed out from the curb, the house whose deed still bore my name shrank in the rearview mirror. I was not angry. I was thinking like an engineer. Some systems in that house had been running wrong for a very long time. I finally decided to go find out what was broken. A unique quiet falls over a dinner table, when an honest truth is spoken aloud for the first time. No fighting, no shouting, just a simple statement, plain as reading a number off a dashboard gauge. The room falls quiet, not because people are shocked. It falls quiet because deep down, everyone already knew. And now, there is no reason left to pretend otherwise. That exact quiet settled over my son's dining room after Chloe spoke. I want to be completely honest about how I felt right then. Because this is not a story about a man flipping a table or gripping the steering wheel with shaking hands on the drive home. I felt something deep inside go still. Not numb, not cold, just still. Like water settling after you stop stirring it. Like a locomotive steadying on the rails after the brakes fully lock in. First, I looked at Chloe. She picked up her fork, cutting her chicken with effortless efficiency, acting like someone who said what needed saying and considered the matter closed. There was no malice in her face. That was the part I kept turning over in my head for hours afterward. There was zero warmth in it. She did not say those words to hurt me. She stated them like company policy. Your health, your problem. Your money is yours. Patrick's money is mine. A terms of service agreement, neat and tidy, handed down across an Easter dinner table, like a landlord sliding a lease renewal under a door. Then I looked at Patrick. My son sat with hands in his lap, shoulders slightly stooped, eyes pinned to that glass jar of tulips, like it was the most vital thing he had ever encountered. His jaw was locked tight. A muscle on the side of his neck twitched constantly, the exact same muscle that used to jump when he tried putting on a brave face as a teenager. He was not going to say anything. He made that choice before I even finished my sentence. We both knew it. And that silent understanding hung over the table between us, like a rock neither of us wanted to pick up. Gary Baxter cleared his throat, reaching for the breadbasket. "Pass the rolls, Helen," he said, as if the last 30 seconds were just a quick weather update and we were moving right along. Helen handed the basket over without lifting her eyes from her plate. Her lips were pressed paper-thin, carrying the tiny, tight posture of a woman who learned long ago that compliance is far easier than involvement. I picked up my fork again, cut off a piece of chicken, put it in my mouth and chewed, tasting absolutely nothing. In 35 years on the railroad, I handled all sorts of mechanical failures. Blown gaskets, seized bearings, coupling systems failing on the wrong track at the absolute worst moment. The rule I learned early and kept forever was simple. When a system breaks, you do not get mad at the machine. You inspect it. You trace the breakdown back to the source. You figure out how long it was running wrong before anyone noticed. For the rest of that dinner, I observed. I watched Gary refill his sweet tea and lean back comfortably, showing the ease of a man making himself right at home in a house that did not belong to him. I watched Helen accept a second helping of roasted potatoes from Chloe without a word of thanks. The attitude you hold when taking service from someone whose job is simply to serve you. I watched Patrick laugh too fast, too eagerly at a joke Gary told about a coworker. The desperate laugh of a man trying hard to hold on to a role he had been playing for years. And I watched Chloe navigate her own dining room, carrying the quiet authority of a woman who knew exactly who pulled the strings at this table. She topped off Gary's glass before he even asked. Passing behind Patrick's chair, her hand briefly touched his arm. Not out of affection, more like a reminder. When she looked at me, her face held nothing beyond polite indifference. Sitting there, fork in hand, I realized that indifference was not personal. I was simply a factor she did not feel the need to account for. The thought sat heavy in my chest like a block of cold iron, lingering. Not quite anger, not quite hurt. Something quieter than both. The distinct feeling of a man who finally saw the outline of a problem he should have noticed long ago, trying to figure out what to do with that truth. Now, that truth belonged entirely to him. After dinner, I helped carry plates to the kitchen. I told Gary his story about his neighbor's pickup truck was funny because it cost me nothing and bought me 5 more minutes of acting normal. At the door, I said goodbye to Chloe, and she gave her standard wave, a subtle lift of the hand. The kind of wave you give someone you expect to see again, but do not need to spend another thought on. I walked out to my truck in the cool April air and let the engine idle for a moment. The porch light cast a long yellow strip over the weed-choked flower beds. Somewhere upstairs, a light turned on, and I knew it was Sam's room. I imagined him up there, pushing his train across the bedroom floor, completely untouched by everything that just happened 30 feet below at the dinner table. Then I started thinking about the money. $3,000 every month. 6 years straight, automatically transferred from my account into Patrick's. I set it up myself. Ooh. I let it run without keeping score. I trusted the arrangement, the way you trust a system that never gave you a reason to pop the panel and check inside. Chloe's words came back crystal clear, ringing in the quiet space. Your money is yours. Fair enough, I thought. Time I started acting like the owner. I shifted into drive and pulled away from the curb. I had a 4-hour drive back to Harlan, and I planned to use every single minute. There was not much to say about the hotel room I rented in Columbus. A double bed, a desk bolted to the wall, a window overlooking the 4th Street parking garage. I rented that same room for 4 years running at the exact same price, mostly because the lady at the front desk knew to hold it for me on holiday weekends, and because it sat just 6 blocks from Patrick's house. If Sam ever needed me, I could get there in 10 minutes. That proximity always felt like the main point. But tonight, everything felt completely different. At 11:47 p.m., I sat down at the desk, opened my laptop, and told myself I was just taking a look at the numbers. I was never one to watch things from a distance. Dorothy used to say that was my best quality and my worst flaw all at once. Once I knew a problem existed, I could not let it rest. I would rather tear a system down to its smallest component than accept a diagnosis I had not verified myself. She would smile a particular way when saying that, the smile of a woman who had come to terms with a core truth about the man she married. Dorothy Ann Calloway had been gone 6 years come November. Sometimes I still heard her voice so clearly I had to remind myself she was not in the next room. She never trusted Chloe. She told me just once at Patrick and Chloe's wedding reception. The band was playing loud, guests were bustling around, and she pulled my sleeve, drawing me to the edge of the tent. Arthur. Her voice was low and steady. The way that girl looks at our Patrick, it's like looking at a step in a plan. I kissed her temple and told her she was overanalyzing a nervous bride. She gave me that look she held only when she knew she was right and knew I was not ready to hear it, then dropped the subject. I logged into the First Heartland Bank portal and pulled up my primary checking account, the one I had kept since before Patrick was born. On the 1st of every month, my pension landed in that account like clockwork. I am an organized man. Opening a blank document alongside the banking portal, I built a simple spreadsheet: date, amount, recipient. 6 years straight, automatic transfers, sending $8,000 to Patrick Calloway's joint account on the first of every month. I did not need to calculate the grand total. On the drive, back after dinner, I had already run the math in the truck, quietly crunching numbers in my head, just like calculating haul weights on long runs through Cumberland Gap. 72 transfers, $3,000 each, totaling $216,000. I leaned back in my chair, staring at that number for a long time. I want to explain exactly what I understood at that moment and what I did not, because the distinction matters. I knew about the transfers. I authorized every single one. What I did not do, what I deliberately chose not to do because I trusted my son. Believing that trust was the best part of loving someone was track where that money went after leaving my account. I assumed it went toward the house, utilities, Sam's school costs, and the daily expenses of a young family living in a city where Patrick's warehouse salary barely covered groceries. I told myself I was helping out. I told myself that was what a father was supposed to do. I pulled up the text messages Patrick sent me over the last 6 years. I kept those texts the same way I kept maintenance logs for every locomotive I ever serviced. Once I started looking, the pattern stood out immediately. Dad. Chloe's dad hit a rough patch. Just this once. Dad, Helen needs a minor procedure. We'll pay you back. Dad, we're short on the car payment this month. Dad, you know how things are. I counted 14 separate requests over 6 years. Every single one framed as an exception. Every single one quietly absorbed into the automatic transfer, without anyone acknowledging that the transfer amount had been bumped up to cover those extra asks. The system adjusted so gradually that I never picked up on the shift. Now I realize that came down to either careless record-keeping on my part or very deliberate management on someone else's. Then I remembered something from 8 months back that I had pushed to the back of my mind. Walking down the hallway at Patrick's house toward the guest bathroom, I overheard Chloe's voice through the cracked kitchen door. Unhurried, the voice of someone perfectly comfortable in the conversation. "The old man's pension is more than enough," she said back then. "Patrick just needs to keep him happy." Right? I stopped in my tracks. I stood in that hallway for 3 full seconds. Then I told myself I must have misheard, or misunderstood, or taken it out of context. I kept walking to the bathroom, saying nothing about it at dinner. The next morning, I drove back to Harlan, filing the memory away in the mental drawer reserved for things I was not ready to inspect. Now I was ready. I shut my laptop. The room was deathly quiet. Outside, a car crept through the parking garage, its headlights briefly sweeping across my ceiling before vanishing. "Dorothy," I said to the empty room, "because sometimes you need to say things out loud to make sure they are real. I think I finally see what's going on." Of course, no answer came. But the questions I needed to ask next had taken shape, sharp and specific, impossible to ignore. Just like fault lines revealing themselves once you know where to look. How much did Patrick know? And how long had he known it? The answer came faster than expected when my son's name lit up my phone screen at 7:23 the next morning. I had barely slept. Not really. I lay on top of the hotel bedspread in my boots, staring at a water stain on the ceiling shaped like the state of Tennessee. The math kept running through my head until gray morning light began peeking through the curtains. And the parking garage outside started filling with Monday morning noise. When the phone rang at 7:23, I was already holding it. "Dad." Patrick's voice sounded cautious, the voice of a man who had rehearsed all night. "I want to apologize for last night, for how Chloe talked to you." That wasn't right. I sat up on the edge of the bed. Somewhere in the garage, a delivery truck was backing up, its reverse alarm beeping at a slow, patient tempo. I let Patrick finish speaking. Then I said, I appreciate that, but that's not what I want to talk about this morning. Pause. Brief, but heavy. Okay, he said. What do you want to talk about? I want to talk about where that money went, Patrick. My voice stayed steady, the way it did at work when I needed a direct answer from someone reluctant to give one. Not where it went after leaving my account. Where it went after reaching yours. The pause stretched longer this time. I could hear him breathing. In the background, a faint hum of a running engine. He was standing out in the driveway or somewhere down the street. Chloe could not hear him. That detail alone told me plenty before he said another word. Dad. He stopped, then restarted. A portion of it went to Chloe's parents. Gary had some debts. Helen needed a few things. It was supposed to be temporary. How long ago was temporary? He did not answer right away. I heard him swallow hard. Patrick. I used the tone I used when he was a boy, and I needed him to understand I was dead serious. Last night I pulled up 6 years of bank statements. $216,000. Are you aware of that number? The sound he made was not quite a word. It was the sound a person makes when something they avoided looking at is placed directly in front of their face. His breathing hitched, and I heard him press a hand over the mic, trying to pull himself together. I knew it was a lot, he finally managed, voice raspy and low. I didn't let myself add it up. I didn't want to know the exact number. Why not? Because if I knew the exact number, I'd have to do something about it. The words poured out like pressure, releasing from a valve stuck shut too long. And if I did something, Chloe would leave. If Chloe left, she'd take Sam. Dad. I know how this sounds. I know exactly how it sounds. I stood up from the bed and walked over to the window. Down in the parking garage, a woman in a gray coat was loading grocery bags into a sedan, moving fast and focused, like people do in the early morning when the day is already pulling away from them. I watched her for a moment. What did Chloe think the money was? I asked. When it came in every month, what did she think it was? Patrick's voice sounded strained. I told her it was money you volunteered to give, that you wanted to help out. I never told her the amount. I let her think it was, I don't know, more like a gift than a set number. So, she didn't know it was $3,000 every month. No, she didn't. She didn't know it had been going on for 6 years. No. She didn't know it was coming out of my retirement savings. A long silence, then he whispered, No, Dad. She didn't know any of that. I pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of my nose, taking a slow breath through my mouth. I was not as angry at Patrick as a person might expect. No raised voice, no slamming fists against walls. What I felt was heavier, harder to set down than anger. The distinct sorrow a father feels when realizing his son chose silence, not out of malice, but out of fear. A fear that had driven the entire house for years, while everyone pretended it was something else. Patrick, I said, did you ever think about telling me? When he answered, his voice broke at the edges. Every month, he said. Every month. When the transfer came through, I thought about calling you. But I didn't because I told myself things would get better. I'd land a better job. Gary would sort out his own mess, and I'd find a way to make it up to you before you found out. He let out a heavy sigh. I kept waiting for a situation where I wouldn't have to tell you, Dad. I kept waiting for it to fix itself. I looked out the window for a long time. The woman with the groceries was gone. The parking garage fell quiet again. It didn't fix itself, I said. No, Patrick said. It didn't. I told him I needed time to think and would call him later. He said okay in the tone of a man who realized okay was the only thing left he could offer. I ended the call and placed the phone on the desk beside the closed laptop. I sat there for 3 minutes. I knew it was 3 minutes because I watched the clock on the desk move from 7:31 to 7:34 without taking my eyes off it once. Then I picked up my truck keys, put on my jacket, walked out of the hotel room, and headed off to have a conversation I knew exactly how to handle. The First Heartland Bank on Broad Street opened its doors at 9 o'clock on weekdays. By 8:51, I was sitting in the parking lot with the engine idling, watching the branch manager unlock the front door from the inside. I spent 30 years as a customer at that bank. Longer than Patrick's been alive, longer than I've owned my house in Harlan, longer than almost any other continuous arrangement in my adult life. The lady at the front counter recognized me the second I walked in, giving me a small nod, the kind of automatic greeting people give when they've seen a familiar face a few hundred times too many. "Mr. Calloway," she said. "Is Mr. Vance expecting you?" "No," I replied, "but I reckon he can spare me a few minutes." Douglas Vance had managed my accounts for nearly 2 decades. He was 58, trimmed neat, carrying the quiet, steady posture of a man who'd spent his entire career across a desk from people facing hard times. A man who understood that quiet was a form of respect. After the front desk called back, he came out to the waiting area himself, shaking my hand with the same firm, unhurried grip I'd grown used to. He led me back to his office without asking why I was there. He'd known me long enough to know I didn't drop in unannounced on a Monday morning over small talk. He closed the door and sat behind his desk. Sitting across from him, I set down the folder I'd printed out yesterday at the hotel business center. 6 years of bank statements, every automatic transfer highlighted in bright yellow, with the cumulative total written in my own hand at the bottom of the last page. "Douglas," I said, "I need to make a few changes this morning." He looked at the folder without touching it, then looked back up at me. "Tell me what you need, Arthur." "I want to cancel the automatic transfer going into Patrick's account. $3,000 a month, sent on the 1st, the one that's been between since April of 2019. I kept my voice flat, the same steady tone I used. Whenever I had to deliver a maintenance assessment nobody wanted to hear. I want it stopped as of today. Not next cycle, no grace period, today. Mr. Vance pulled the folder closer and opened it. He studied the first page for a moment, then the second. His expression didn't change, but I watched his eyes move carefully down the columns. The look of an experienced man absorbing crucial information and choosing not to react before he had the full picture. "That's been a long-standing arrangement," he said quietly. "It has," I said, "and that's precisely why I'm stopping it." He gave a single, slow nod, the nod of a man who caught the full weight behind those words. "What else?" "The secondary card on my personal credit card account, the one issued to Patrick Calloway as an authorized user." I leaned forward slightly. "I need that closed today, too. I want his access revoked immediately." Mr. Vance set the folder down, lacing his fingers together on the desk. "Arthur, I want to make sure you understand the mechanics here, because there's a practical consequence worth knowing." He measured his words carefully, not to slow me down, but because he was the kind of man who believed people ought to have accurate information before taking a step. If Patrick, or anyone connected to him, set up recurring payments through that card, monthly bills, vehicle installments, subscriptions, those charges will bounce the second the card is deactivated. There's no grace period on the merchant's end. Next billing cycle. Anything scheduled to hit that card won't go through. I thought of that silver SUV sitting in the driveway. The one Gary bragged about over dinner. Leather seats, backup camera, monthly loan payments. Helen's vehicle, clearly running on a payment plan that someone had been quietly covering for so long everybody forgot who was actually footing the bill. I understand the mechanics, I said. All right. Mr. Vance turned to his computer and began typing. The office went quiet, filled only with the soft clack of the keyboard and the muffled hum of the bank lobby outside the closed door. I do have one question for you, and you don't have to answer it. He paused his typing and looked right at me. Are you sure about this, Arthur? Not because I think you're wrong, but because decisions like this tend to have a fallout radius. It hits more than just one person. That's the point, Douglas, I said. That's exactly what I want. He held my gaze for a second. Then his expression shifted slightly. Not quite a smile, but the look of a man who understood the situation far better than he had a minute ago, deciding right then not to push any further. Consider it done, he said, turning back to his keyboard. He printed out the confirmation forms, sliding them across the desk one by one. I read every single line before putting pen to paper. Cancel automatic transfer. Terminate authorized card. Remove Patrick Calloway from my credit account. My signature came out looking the same as ever. That tight, practical cursive I'd used on work orders and maintenance logs for 35 years. Before standing up to leave, I had one more request for Mr. Vance. I want to open a separate savings account, I said, not tied to any existing account. No authorized users, no linked cards, just a place to hold money that belongs strictly to me. Mr. Vance actually smiled at that, a genuine, brief, honest smile. I'll have those papers ready in 10 minutes, he said. We shook hands at his door. His grip was firm and unhurried as ever. The handshake of a man who had nothing to prove and nothing to hide. By 10:44 a.m., I walked out of First Heartland Bank with a confirmation receipt tucked in my jacket pocket and a slip of paper bearing my new account number in my shirt pocket. The air outside was crisp and bright, the kind of April morning that makes Kentucky feel close enough to touch, even standing in an Ohio parking lot. I had a 4-hour drive ahead of me. And I already knew the first phone call would come before I made it back to Harlan. I just didn't know how many more would follow. I couldn't begin to count how many times I'd driven I-75. I'd driven I-75 between Columbus and the Kentucky state line. I'd driven it through January ice storms, through summer road work that turned 4-hour trip into 6 hindfarthig through the flat, dull gray light of November mornings when the roadside fields looked like they'd given up on color for the season. I knew every exit, every rest stop, every mile marker where the radio signal faded out and came back. I'd driven it with Dorothy sitting in the passenger seat, feet resting on the dashboard as she read paperback novels. I'd driven it alone after her funeral and dozens of times since, heading up to see Sam. But I'd never driven it with this much on my mind. By 11:15, I cleared the Columbus traffic, pulled into the left lane, and set the cruise control to 68. Dorothy used to say, I did my best thinking behind the wheel. Given enough highway, I could work through problems I couldn't solve on the couch or at the kitchen table. She said it was because driving gave my hands something to do so my mind could run without distraction. She was right about that. Just like she was right about most things. She was right about Chloe, too. My mind drifted back to the afternoon. Dorothy and I signed the papers for the Columbus house. October of 2017, 18 months into her treatments. She insisted on making the drive up from Harlan because she wanted to see the place before any ink dried on paper. The realtor waited in the kitchen while we walked the empty rooms together. Dorothy stood by the window in what would become the living room, looking out at the backyard for a long time. "It's a good house," she finally said. "It is," I agreed. She turned to look at me, bearing that familiar expression that meant she was about to say something she'd already made up her mind about, no matter what I had to say back. "Arthur, put it in your name only. Not Patrick's, not joint. Just yours. Dorothy, they're married. It seems like it ought to be." "I know how it looks," she interrupted, carrying that gentle firmness she'd perfected over 31 years of marriage. "On this one thing, I'm asking you to do it my way." I did it her way. I didn't ask why because I trusted her instincts. I trusted them like a well-calibrated instrument. Not because I always understood the reading, but because that instrument had never once been wrong. The deed was drawn up in my name alone, and I put it away in a metal box in the closet back home in Harlan. I hadn't thought about it again until this morning, sitting in Douglas Vance's office, signing cancellation papers. Dorothy saw it coming long ago. Not the specific details. Not the $3,000 a month. Not the 6 years. Not Gary Baxter's gambling debts, showing up as a line item on my retirement savings. But she saw the shape of it. She saw it in Chloe's eyes at the wedding, and quietly, without drama, without a single word of blame, she made sure the house stayed in my name, just in case. Past 1 p.m., I crossed into Kentucky. The green and white "Welcome to the Bluegrass State" sign slipped past on the right, and the tightness in my chest eased up just a bit. That subtle way your shoulders drop when your tires hit familiar ground. Driving the remaining stretch through the mountains, I thought about Patrick. Not with anger, though I had every right to be angry, but with the heavy sorrow of a father watching his son make choices, finally understanding why he made them. Patrick hadn't stolen from me. He just allowed things to happen, then allowed them to keep happening, because stopping felt more dangerous than letting them run. Fear isn't the same as malice. I've learned at least that much in 68 years. It doesn't change the outcome, but the cause always matters, even if it doesn't serve as an excuse. The road narrowed as I descended into Harlan County. Mountains rose on both sides, the trees at higher elevations still bare, but lower down, green was starting to show. My house appeared around the final curve before town, white siding, the repaired section of the roof, still showing a slightly different shade than the rest. The workshop door stood open, just the way I always left it. Thomas Greer sat on his porch across the road. He was 70, built thick, carrying the posture of a man who'd spent his life hauling heavy things and never quite unlearned the habit. Seeing my truck turn into the driveway, he raised his coffee mug in an unhurried gesture, a man waiting without a shred of impatience. Thomas had that gift, patient presence, never rushing. I parked, stepped down, and stood in my driveway for a moment. The air smelled of creek water and pine, that cool, clean Harlan smell in April that had meant home to me for 30 years. "Easter go that bad?" Thomas called out from across the road. "It was educational," I called back. He nodded, the nod of a man who knew educational and bad often meant the exact same thing. "Come on over when you're ready," he said. Saved some good bourbon just for the occasion. Give me an hour, I said. I went inside, stood in the kitchen for a moment, and let the quiet wash over me. Then I brewed a pot of coffee, sat at the table where Dorothy and I had eaten 30 years of ordinary dinners, and thought about what came next. My phone stayed quiet in my pocket all afternoon. It would ring eventually, I knew that. But for those few hours, in my own house, in my own county, I let it stay silent. Thomas Greer served 2 tours in Vietnam with the 101st Airborne, coming home with a Purple Heart and a permanent distrust of anything moving too fast or talking too loud. For the 50 years since, he'd lived on his own terms in a house 300 feet from mine along a gravel road outside Harlan. At 70, his broad shoulders and hands looked like they were carved from the same hardwood. He used to patch his porch steps every spring. He'd outlived 2 dogs, a wife who left him in 1987, another who stayed until she passed in 2014, and more neighbors than both of us combined could count. He was the kind of man who listened to everything and asked about nothing, which made him the finest company I knew. At 6 o'clock, I carried the bottle of top-shelf bourbon from the cabinet above the fridge across the road. Thomas was already in his chair, a second glass sitting on worth drinking, as if he knew I'd bring something worth drinking. The sun had dipped behind the eastern ridge, turning the air cool and blue, the way light fades fast in the Kentucky mountains. I sat down. I poured the drinks. I told him everything. Thomas listened the way he always did, barely moving, never filling my pauses. His eyes rested on the middle distance, like a man watching weather move across the valley. I told him about Easter dinner, the tone in Chloe's voice when she said, "Your health is your responsibility." Patrick's silence, the midnight hotel room, and the bank statements totaling $216,000 over 6 years. And Paul told him about the morning call with Patrick and the 2 hours I spent with Douglas Vance at First Heartland Bank. I didn't add commentary. I laid out the facts in order, just like writing a breakdown report. When I finished, Thomas picked up his glass and took a slow sip. Setting it back on the armrest, he said, "I ought to show you something." He stepped inside and brought out a small spiral notebook, the kind you buy at any drugstore for $1.50. He handed it over. "I've been keeping notes," he said. "Started about 2 years back." Didn't say anything at the time because I wasn't sure what I was looking at, and I don't care to talk about things I'm not sure of. I opened the notebook. Thomas wrote, in a small, neat hand, the handwriting of a man trained to record accurate info under conditions that made accuracy tough. Dates, times, brief descriptions. Twice in the past 2 years, a man had come onto my property while I was away in Columbus. He knocked, waited, walked around the side of the house toward the workshop, and left when nobody answered. Both times Thomas noted the vehicle, a dark blue sedan with rental plates. "You know who that was?" Thomas asked. "Gary Baxter," I said. "Chloe's father." Thomas nodded, like a man having his suspicions confirmed rather than being surprised. "Figured it was someone connected to that mess up there," he said, jerking his chin toward Columbus. Looked like a man taking inventory. I closed the notebook and handed it back. "What was he coming down here for?" "Couldn't say for sure, but a man driving 4 hours from Columbus to wander around another man's property before driving 4 hours back is a man trying to gauge what that property is worth." Thomas refilled his glass. "My guess? He wanted to know what you had, and if any of it was liquid." I processed that information for a moment. Gary Baxter driving down to Harlan County, eyeing my house, my workshop, my land, sizing up a 68-year-old man's life from the outside. The thought didn't bring anger. Instead, it brought the whole picture into sharper focus, like adjusting a lens you didn't realize was blurry. "One more thing," Thomas said. Reaching into his shirt pocket, he pulled out his phone, an old model in a thick rubber case. He turned it over in his hand. "I ran 2 tours in places where you had to trust your people completely, with zero margin for error. One thing they drilled into us early was documentation. You write it down, you record it, you never step into a situation without proof of what was said." He looked at me steady. "Got a recording app on this phone. Had it about 18 months now. Used it twice. Once when the county road commissioner tried telling me he never agreed to fix the culvert at my property line, and once when my insurance adjuster claimed he told me something he definitely didn't." He paused. "Both recordings settled the matter. You think we're going to need that?" I asked. "I think a man who sends his father-in-law to snoop around your property while you're out of town is building up to something," Thomas said. "And I think, when that day comes, you'll want something stronger in your pocket than your word against theirs." He set the phone on the railing between us. "Not saying you have to use it. Just saying it's there. In Kentucky, the one-party consent rule means as long as one person in the conversation agrees to be recorded, the recording is fully legal." Thomas was present. Thomas consented. I'd never needed to know that particular law before. I kept it in mind now. "They'll be coming down here now," I said. It wasn't a question. "They'll come," Thomas agreed. "People like Gary Baxter don't swallow a loss quietly. They need an audience for their grievances." He picked up his glass again. "When they do, let me know ahead of time. I'll come over for coffee." I looked out over the road. The gravel caught the faint glow of the last twilight. Across the way, my house stood solid in the dark. The workshop door remained open, just as I'd left it. Everything was right where I put it. 19 days, I said quietly. "That's May 1st. "Then we've got 19 days, Thomas said, pouring us both another splash of bourbon. The first Monday of May arrived clear and bright, the kind of morning where sunshine hits the ridges around Harlan and makes everything look almost unreal. Since just past 8 a.m., I'd been up on the roof, replacing the final section of shingles. A storm blew off the north side of the house last fall. My hammer, nail gun, spare shingles, and a cup of coffee sat within arm's reach. I lost myself in the steady rhythm that only honest labor provides. When your hands stay busy enough, your mind finally stops racing. At 8:47, the phone in my shirt pocket buzzed. I didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was. For nearly 2 weeks, I'd been waiting for the first consequence of my decision to hit. I just didn't know which problem would surface first. It was Patrick. "Dad," he blurted out before I could even say hello. His breathing sounded ragged. "They just towed Helen's SUV. The tow truck came this morning. They're right in front of Gary and Helen's house, loading it onto a flatbed. Chloe is losing her mind right now." I slowly set the nail gun down beside me and leaned back against the roof. The yard below remained perfectly still. The workshop door stood open. Birds chirped in the maple trees, and the gravel driveway sat empty. Everything around me looked so peaceful, even as a storm brewed elsewhere. "The loan payment was due today," I replied calmly. That loan had been paid through the authorized card I canceled 11 days ago. Once that account vanished, the automatic charge bounced. Most lenders grant a brief grace period, But if the payment method turns invalid, they usually accelerate collections. Patrick stayed silent. Nobody's making a mistake here, I continued. This is just the contract doing what it was designed to do. A few seconds ticked by. Finally, he spoke again, his voice much lower. Chloe wants to speak to you. If she wants to call, I answered, I'll answer. Less than a minute later, my phone rang again. Chloe this time. The composure I'd heard at the Easter dinner table had been replaced by something much sharper. She sounded like she was holding it together. But barely, as if forcing herself to stay calm while anger pressed against every word she spat out. Arthur, she began. There's clearly a problem with Patrick's account. I need you to contact the bank today and get this corrected. There's no problem, I replied. I closed that account on April 21st. Patrick is no longer an authorized user, and every recurring charge linked to that card ended the moment it was canceled. Silence. Not long, maybe 3 seconds. When she spoke again, the edge in her voice hardened. You need to think carefully about what you're doing. This isn't just about a car. You're damaging Patrick's relationship with his family. She paused before dropping the line she knew would sting, and you're risking your relationship with Sam. I looked out past the roofline, toward the mountains stretching across the horizon. They'd been standing long before any of us were born. Unmoved by arguments, money, or pride. I have been thinking carefully, I answered. In fact, I've done little else for days. Taking a deep breath, I continued. You told me at Easter dinner that my money belongs to me. It does, she interrupted. I'm simply taking your advice, I said. I'm keeping it right where it belongs. You're twisting my words. No, I replied softly. I'm taking them seriously. Another beat of silence. Then I added, Have a good day. Before she could continue, I hung up. For the next few minutes, I just sat on the roof. The new shingles beside me showed a stark contrast against the faded old ones. Anyone looking closely could easily spot the repair, but it was sturdy enough to hold up against years of wind and rain. Good work doesn't need to hide itself. It just needs to last. My phone buzzed again. Patrick. This time I let it ring until it went to voicemail. Half a minute later, a text popped up. Dad, she's calling her parents now. I'm sorry. I don't know what's going to happen. I read it, then typed my reply. I know exactly what she's going to do next. Don't apologize. Don't get caught in the middle. I slid the phone back into my pocket. There were still a few feet of roof left to finish, and I'd rather spend my energy on wood and shingles than arguments that couldn't change a thing. While working, I realized something unexpected. I'd assumed that when the first fallout arrived, I'd feel a surge of triumph. Instead, the feeling settling inside me was far quieter. It wasn't revenge, it wasn't joy. It felt more like watching an equation balance out after years of collecting numbers. No drama, no emotion, just the natural outcome when choices get made over and over until there's nowhere left to turn. For 6 years, I'd been quietly footing bills nobody even noticed. Insurance, car loans, credit cards, monthly statements. Everyone accepted it all as if it appeared by magic. When I finally pulled my support, the entire structure began showing just how dependent it really was. Somewhere down the highway, Helen's silver SUV sat on the back of a flatbed, heading toward an impound lot. The payments that kept it on the road had come straight out of the retirement savings of a 68-year-old man who was never even invited to sit behind the wheel. That arrangement was over. I hammered the last batch of nails in place before noon and climbed down the ladder. Inside, I made a simple sandwich and took it to the kitchen table. While eating, I noticed 2 missed calls from an unfamiliar number. The area code wasn't local. Curious, I looked it up online. The number belonged to First Heartland Bank's main branch in Columbus. I couldn't help but smile. I already knew what happened. Failing to convince me, Chloe tried another angle. She called the bank herself, likely claiming to be Patrick's wife, hoping someone would restore the account or reactivate the card. Unfortunately for her, that was never going to work. Months ago, after updating my estate planning, Douglas Vance helped me tighten every security measure on the account. No employee could alter a thing without speaking directly to me. Every request required my explicit authorization. Every verification relied on personal security questions only I could answer. No amount of pressure from relatives could bend those rules. Finishing my lunch, I rinsed my plate and picked up the phone again. Thomas answered on the second ring. "How's the roof coming?" he asked. "Nearly done," I answered. And the first domino finally fell, just as expected. "Right on schedule," I said. "The SUV was towed this morning. Didn't take long for her to call the bank, trying to undo everything." Thomas chuckled softly. "Figured that'd be her next move." "Me too." "You think this is the end of it?" I looked out the kitchen window at the freshly repaired roof. Sunshine bounced off the new shingles. "No," I replied, "not by a long shot." When people have spent years believing someone else will always step in to rescue them, they rarely stop after the first failed attempt. They just move on to the next plan. What mattered was that every road she chose now led to the exact same dead end. For the first time in years, those decisions were entirely hers to make. And for the first time in years, the consequences belonged entirely to her, too. The following afternoon, I was in the workshop, sanding the back of a cabinet door. I'd been meaning to finish since February, when my phone buzzed on the workbench. It was a forwarded email from Patrick. The subject line read, "Riverside Academy tuition payment declined. Immediate action required." I set the sandpaper down and read the email twice. Riverside Academy was the private school Sam attended in Columbus, a solid institution on the east side of town. Small classes, good teachers, the kind of place that sent progress, reports home weekly, and expected parents to stay involved. The email was formal and direct. Leanie Lyle, carrying the frank wording of an institution that had sent similar notices before, and dropped the sugarcoating. The May tuition payment had bounced upon submission. They required full settlement within 5 business days. Failure to clear the balance would result in the student being placed on administrative suspension, meaning Sam couldn't return to class until the account was settled. Patrick's message below the forwarded email consisted of just 5 words. "Dad, did you know this?" I called him back immediately. He picked up on the first ring. "I had no idea you were paying for this," Patrick said, his voice carrying the distinct exhaustion of a man who had absorbed too many shocks in 2 days. "Chloe told me she was taking care of tuition. She told me that every year. I never saw a bill. I never asked. I just took it for granted." "How long has Sam been at Riverside?" I asked. 3 years. I walked over to the desk in the corner of the workshop and opened my laptop. Logging into the First Heartland Bank portal, I pulled up the transaction history for the closed secondary card. The complete record, not just the summary. 3 years of tuition, September and January. Billed automatically to the card sitting in Patrick's wallet. The card bearing my name. Tuition alone totaled $36,000. I hadn't counted it separately in that 216,000. It was swallowed up in the total, never named for what it actually was. Patrick, I said carefully. Did Chloe know where the money for Sam's school was coming from? A long silence followed. I could hear him breathing through his nose, a habit from when he was trying to say something he didn't want to admit out loud. I think she knew it came from somewhere connected to you, he finally said. I don't think she realized it hit that specific card directly. I kept things vague, Dad. That's on me. I shut the laptop. Through the workshop window, I could see the road outside, the gravel washed out in the afternoon light. Across the way, Thomas's house sat quiet. I thought about Sam sitting in a classroom at Riverside right now, completely unaware that his enrollment was 48 hours away from being suspended because the adults in his life built his education on a foundation nobody bothered to look at directly. Sam was only 10. He hadn't done a single thing wrong. I'm going to call the school, I said. Dad, you don't need to. I'm calling the school, Patrick. Not for Chloe, and not for you. For Sam. I kept my voice steady, but I wanted him to understand the difference. Sam didn't create this mess. Sam isn't getting placed on administrative suspension because the adults around him couldn't handle their finances. Patrick went silent for a moment, then spoke in a voice stripped of its defensive edge. Okay, Dad. Thank you. I dialed the Riverside Academy business office directly. The woman who answered carried a crisp, efficient manner, handling these kinds of calls every single day. I identified myself as Arthur Calloway, the primary account holder for the card used over the past 3 years. Mr. Calloway, she said, we do show that card on file as the primary payment method. It was declined when we ran it this cycle. I canceled that card, I said. I'll clear the balance for May using another card today, but I also need to update the account setup going forward. I explained that I wanted all future invoices emailed directly to me, CCing Patrick as the registered parent. The school required written confirmation from a parent or legal guardian to update billing contacts. Patrick would need to sign a form. I told her I'd have him call before the end of the day. That's very straightforward, Mr. Calloway, she said. We appreciate you reaching out to us directly. I settled the May tuition while on the phone with her. $1,140, charged to my personal card, the one with only my name on it. She confirmed the administrative hold would be lifted by tomorrow morning, leaving Sam's classes completely unaffected. After hanging up, I dialed Patrick back. I covered Sam's May tuition, I said. You need to call Riverside today and sign the billing update form. From now on, invoices go to both you and me. No more hidden operations nobody can see. I'll call them right now, Patrick said. Good. I paused. Patrick, I need you to hear this clearly. I'm not doing this to claim credit. I'm doing this because your son has a right to go to school without carrying the weight of this nonsense. But I need you to understand. This is the absolute last time money moves in this family, without everyone knowing exactly where it comes from and where it goes. Patrick didn't reply immediately. When he did, his voice came out quieter than I'd heard it in years. I understand, Dad, he said. I hear you. I ended the call and stood in the workshop for a moment. The cabinet door was still half-sanded on the bench, surrounding me with the smell of sawdust and linseed oil. Then Patrick called right back. His voice dropped to the lowest point I'd heard since Dorothy's funeral. Dad, he said. Chloe just told me her parents are driving down to Harlan this weekend. She rented a car for them this afternoon. Patrick called again on Wednesday morning, while I was brewing coffee. Not the rushed, breathless voice from previous calls. This time felt different. Quieter, more deliberate. The tone of a man who had spent days thinking through what he wanted to say before speaking. "Dad, I need to give you a heads up," he said. "Gary and Helen are leaving Columbus Friday evening, driving down themselves. Chloe rented them a mid-sized sedan from the Enterprise on Route 40. They'll be in Harlan Saturday morning." I poured my coffee and sat at the kitchen table. "What does Chloe think they're going to accomplish?" Patrick let out a slow exhale. "She thinks Gary can talk sense into you." Those were her exact words. "Talk sense into you." He paused. I told her that's not how I'd describe Gary Baxter's approach to difficult conversations. She didn't want to hear it. "Did you tell her that, Patrick? Or did you just think it?" A brief silence. Then, carrying the honesty of a man done pretending, I told her. She walked out of the room. That was something resembling progress. Not enough, but something. I noted it and asked, "What else?" "Gary told Chloe he's coming down to explain family obligations to you," Patrick said, his voice carrying a hint of embarrassment for his father-in-law. "Said he was going to lay out the situation clearly. Man to man." Used man to man twice in the same breath. I took a sip of my coffee. Outside, a pair of crows landed on the fence post at the edge of the yard, engaging in a firm, pointless debate over something. I watched them for a moment. "All right," I said. "Thanks for telling me. Dad, I tried to stop this." "I know you tried. I mean it. Stay out of it this weekend, Patrick. This isn't your conversation to hold." After breakfast, I walked across the road to Thomas's house, taking the long way around the backyard. A habit when I wanted to think without rushing to get anywhere. Thomas was in his driveway, loading split firewood onto the rack by the side of his house. He worked with an unhurried efficiency, the way a man handles a task he's done. So many times his body runs on autopilot while his mind focuses elsewhere. He looked up when he heard my boots crunching on the gravel. "They're coming," I said. "Figured." He set down an armload of wood, straightened his back, and rolled his shoulders. "When?" "Saturday morning." Thomas nodded, reaching for another log. "You want me around? I want you over for coffee," I said. "Just like you come over every Saturday morning. Nothing unusual. No setup." At that, he almost smiled. "No setup," he repeated. "Just a neighbor dropping by." He stacked the last piece of wood and wiped his dusty hands together. "You got things ready to show them?" "I've been printing documents for 3 straight days," I said. Thomas picked up his coffee cup from the porch railing and took a drink. "What are you expecting from Gary?" I thought about Thomas's notebook, those 2 entries with rental plates, the man wandering around my property with the eye of someone taking inventory. "I'm expecting a man who believes if he raises his voice loud enough, the other person will quiet down," I said. "I've seen Gary Baxter's type before. I spent 35 years in railroad yards around men who thought volume equaled authority. And how do those types usually turn out?" "Great at first," I said. "Right up until the second they run into something unmovable." Thomas looked at me with an expression he reserved, only for things he considered true and complete. He set his cup back on the railing. "I'll be over at 10, he said. "I'll have my phone on me." I spent the rest of the week quietly. I printed out 6 full years of bank statements, organizing them into the blue folder I kept in my filing cabinet. Rent payments, vehicle loans, Gary and Helen's trips to Florida. Funded by Arthur Calloway without an invitation, Every single item had its own highlighted line. I wrote the total at the bottom of the last page in my own hand, using the tight numbers I'd used and maintenance logs for 35 years. $216,000. $216,000. I also pulled out the original deed to the Columbus house, making 2 clean copies on the bedroom printer. I placed 1 copy in the blue folder and returned the original to the metal box in the closet, where Dorothy had always kept important papers. The deed bore my name. Only my name. Just like Dorothy insisted, on Thursday night, I called Patrick one last time. "Are you staying in Columbus this weekend?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "Chloe wants me here when her parents get back Saturday night. Wants a debrief, as she called it." "Good," I said. "Stay there. Let me handle Harlan." Another pause, shorter than usual. "Dad," Patrick said, "whatever happens Saturday, I just want you to know I'm sorry things reached this point." "I know you're sorry," I said. "Get some sleep, Patrick." I hung up and looked out the kitchen window at the dark road, my workshop, and the mountains rising behind it. Solid and indifferent, just like the mountains themselves. Saturday was 2 days away. The blue folder was ready. Thomas would arrive at 10 sharp, and Gary Baxter was cruising down the highway, 4 hours away, rehearsing a speech he believed would fix everything. He had no idea what was waiting for him in that living room. I heard the rental car before I saw it. An unfamiliar engine, humming slowly down the gravel road, driven with the caution of someone searching for house numbers to avoid overshooting. I was in the kitchen drinking my second cup of coffee, and I didn't rush to the window. I let them park. I let them get out. I let them walk up to the door and knock before setting my cup down to answer. Gary Baxter filled the doorframe, the way big men do when they want you to notice how large they are. He dressed up more than the occasion called for. Dark trousers, a collared shirt, and a sport coat. The attire of a man who believed presentation made up 9/10 of authority. Helen stood slightly behind him in a floral blouse, clutching her purse tight against her stomach, her eyes darting past me into the entryway with a quick, calculating look as if appraising the value of everything she saw. "Arthur." Gary extended his hand, using the grip of a man conducting an interview. "Thanks for having us." I shook his hand. "Come on in," I said. "Just brewed coffee." I led them into the living room and gestured toward the sofa. Gary took the middle, spreading out like a man, trying to claim as much territory as possible. Helen sat right next to him, still clutching her purse. Taking the armchair across from them, I poured coffee from the pot on the side table, without asking if they wanted any. Gary took his cup. Helen held hers with both hands, staring at the framed photos on the mantel. Dorothy and me at Niagara Falls in 1994. Patrick's high school graduation. 6-year-old Sam holding a model locomotive in both hands. 3 minutes later, Thomas knocked twice and opened the front door. Just like he'd done on 1,000 Saturday mornings. He walked in, holding his own mug, wearing a canvas work jacket, looking like a man who simply had nothing better to do across the road. "Morning, Arthur." He glanced at Gary and Helen, with the mild, unreadable curiosity of a man stumbling upon unexpected guests, but not particularly caring either way. "Didn't realize you had company. I can come back later." "Sit down, Thomas," I said. "It's fine." Thomas took the corner chair, setting his mug on the side table and placing his phone face down right beside it. He didn't say another word. Gary tracked him for a moment, trying to decide if Thomas was a variable he needed to account for, then clearly decided he wasn't. Clearing his throat, Gary leaned forward with elbows resting on his knees, assuming the posture of a man about to deliver a rehearsed presentation. Arthur, we're all family here. I want to put that out front. Whatever disagreements have come up lately, we're on the same side. I appreciate you saying so, Gary, I said. Go on. He nodded, reassured by what he took for compliance. Chloe is very upset about the car and the bank accounts. Helen is very upset, too. A lot of disruptive things happened in a very short time, and I think it's important for us as a family to sit down and figure out how to get back to the way things were. Back to the way things were, I repeated. Precisely. Gary spread his hands, making the gesture of a reasonable man, laying out a reasonable point. Patrick and Chloe have obligations. A house to maintain, a son to raise. The arrangement you had set up worked for everybody. I don't see why we need to throw all of that away over one dinner conversation, I said. One dinner conversation, I said. That's all it was, Arthur. Gary's voice took on a patient, slightly condescending tone, the tone of a man explaining the obvious to someone he considered a bit slow. Chloe misspoke. Emotions ran high. That happens in families. You don't tear down 6 years of support over one bad moment. Helen set her cup down, pressing a hand to her chest. We relied on that stability, Arthur, she said, her voice carefully pitched to sound fragile. Our lives were built around knowing things were taken care of. When things change suddenly like this, it impacts everything. I looked at Helen for a moment. She met my gaze with practiced composure. The composure of a woman who had used that exact look successfully many times before. I understand, Helen, I said. Change is hard. I stood up. Walking over to the side table by the bookshelf, I picked up the blue folder I'd left there last night. Unhurried, I carried it back and laid it flat on the coffee table between us, the way you lay down something that speaks entirely for itself. Gary looked at the folder. Then he looked at me. Something shifted deep in his eyes. A tiny recalibration. The first sign that this conversation wasn't going to follow the script he'd rehearsed on the drive down from Columbus. Before we talk about getting back to the way things were, I said, sitting back down and lacing my fingers together, I want to make sure you both have a clear picture of what the way things were actually looked like. I opened the folder. The first page was the summary sheet. 12 months of transfers, January through December of 2019. $3,000 a month, $36,000 for the year. Every single transaction stamped with the date and time, straight from the bank records. I formatted it landscape, so the columns were easy to read. I slid it across the coffee table toward Gary without adding a comment. He picked it up. His reading glasses were in his breast pocket, and he unfolded them with one hand. A slightly annoyed efficiency typical of a man who resented needing glasses at all. He looked at the page, his jaw tightening. That's 1 year, I said. There are 6 of them. There are spoff. I laid the remaining pages across the table in order. 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024. 6 sheets of paper, 6 years. The numbers stayed consistent with striking regularity. The first of every month, $3,000. 72 consecutive times without interruption. I laid them down like evidence. Unaggressive, undramatic, just one page after another in correct order. Just as a man who spent 35 years reading maintenance logs understood. Facts didn't need decoration to do their job. Helen leaned forward to look. The color drained from her face so fast and completely, it was like watching a window go dark. Her fingers clamped tight around the coffee cup she was holding. Then, with a tiny, cautious movement, she set it back on the side table, as if needing her hands free to handle whatever was coming next. I categorized those expenses as closely as I could, I said, turning to the tabbed section at the back of the folder. Monthly installments on a vehicle, the exact SUV towed away last Thursday. I paused, letting that sentence land. Recurring charges for a casino rewards program in Cincinnati, registered under the name Gary R. Baxter. I looked up at Gary as I said it. He didn't look away, but something flinched deep behind his eyes. Not dramatic, just the small, instinctual reaction of a man hearing tied to something he never expected to see recorded on paper. Medical bills from 3 different facilities over 4 years. A 9-day trip to Fort Lauderdale in February of 2022. Various household expenses I couldn't categorize specifically, though the statements show them moving through the same account at regular intervals. Arthur. Gary started leaning forward, assuming a posture to cut me off. I'm not finished, I said calmly, without a trace of heat, the way you speak to a machine trying to interrupt a calibration procedure. Gary closed his mouth and leaned back. The rehearsed authority he walked in with, the sport coat, the firm handshake, the man-to-man confidence, wasn't entirely gone, but it had lost its footing. For the first time since arriving, he looked like a man not entirely sure which room he was standing in. I flipped to the final sheet, showing the summary total written at the bottom in my own handwriting, using the tight numbers I'd used on work orders and maintenance logs for 35 years. I turned the folder around and pushed it across the table so both of them could see clearly. $216,000. A sound came from Helen's throat, a small instinctual escape of compressed air, the kind that slips out before a person decides whether to make a noise at all. Her hand rose, pressing flat against her sternum. This wasn't the rehearsed posture from earlier, not the careful display of fragility she brought into the room when the visit started. Her fingers were trembling. She pressed them harder against her chest as if that might stop them, but it didn't work. Gary stared at the number. The confidence he carried through my front door pulled back behind his eyes, like water receding before a wave. Still there, but gathering weight for something he hadn't yet decided how to do. Now, I said, leaning back with hands folded in my lap. I want to ask you something, Gary. When Chloe told you Patrick was supporting you guys, that he was doing great, that he got promoted, that the family was on solid financial footing, what exactly did she tell you that money was? Gary set the folder on the table. He took off his reading glasses and folded them carefully, giving his hands something to do. When a man needs to keep his hands busy, it usually means his mind is working through a problem he didn't expect to encounter. She said, Patrick was making good money, he finally said, his voice dropping far lower than when he walked in, the surface gloss completely gone. She said he'd been given more responsibility at work, that he wanted to help out, that he was proud to be in a position to give back after everything you did for them. I let him finish. Patrick has held the exact same position at the warehouse for 4 years, at the exact same pay grade, I said. His salary covers their groceries and utilities. It covers gas and phone bills. On a good month, it covers a dinner out. Everything else in that folder. The house they live in, the car towed. Thursday morning, Sam's private school tuition for 3 years. Casino chips in Cincinnati, Fort Lauderdale trips, medical bills. All of it came straight out of my retirement account. Every single penny. Not 1 cent came from Patrick's paycheck. A heavy silence settled over the room. Thomas sat in his corner chair, saying nothing, which was entirely right. Some silences don't need participants. They need witnesses. Helen turned her head to look at Gary. It wasn't a look a wife gives a husband for comfort. It was the look of a woman realizing the story she'd been living inside was written by someone else behind her back, and written so poorly that the seams were now splitting open. "Gary," she said, her voice shaking with an instability that had nothing to do with performance. "What did Chloe actually tell us?" Gary didn't answer her right away. He looked at the folder on the table, staring at the number in my handwriting at the bottom of the last page. I could see him doing what I'd done 11 days ago in that hotel room in Columbus. Running the math, checking every line against what he'd believed was true, searching for an error in the ledger, and finding absolutely nothing. Numbers don't lie, even when the people wrapped around them do. "She told us Patrick was successful," he finally said. The words came out slowly, the tone of a man hearing himself say something out loud that could never be taken back. Something he wouldn't have chosen to say if he'd understood its full meaning earlier. "She told us he was proud to give back. Said he wanted to take care of family, because he finally had the means to do it." He paused, raising a hand to cover his mouth for a second. Not dramatic, just the restrained movement of a man deciding whether to let certain emotions out. "She never told us it was your money." I let that sentence linger in the room for a long moment, adding nothing. I didn't need to. The number on the last page was doing all the work, just as it had been since Gary put on his reading glasses to look at page 1. Then, Gary reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Dialing without asking permission told me everything I needed to know about how he handled finding himself in the wrong. He didn't walk outside. He didn't lower his voice. Sitting right there on my living room sofa, he put his daughter on speaker. I knew it wasn't out of thoughtfulness. It was performance. He needed witnesses to show he was taking charge of the situation. The phone rang 3 times before Chloe picked up. "Dad?" Her voice came through the speaker, sharp and alert. "How is it going? Is he being reasonable?" Gary's jaw tightened visibly. "I need you to explain something to me," he said, his voice carrying a specific, controlled anger. The anger of a man who had decided to direct his fury in one direction. "Your mother and I are sitting here looking at 6 years of bank statements. $216,000, Chloe, straight out of Arthur's retirement account. Not Patrick's salary, not bonuses. Arthur's retirement." Dead silence on the line. 3 seconds, maybe 4. "Dad, the situation is complicated." "It isn't complicated at all." Gary cut in, bringing a harshness I'd never heard from him before. "I asked you directly when this started. I asked where the money was coming from. You told me Patrick was doing great. You told me he was taking on more responsibility at work. You told me he wanted to take care of family." His voice dropped an octave, rough and stripped of polish. "Did you lie to us, Chloe?" Another silence followed, even longer this time. "I managed the situation," Chloe said carefully. "Patrick was aware of the arrangement. This isn't." "Did you lie to us?" Gary repeated, without preamble or giving the question an escape hatch. The sound from the phone wasn't quite an answer. "Yes." It was the sound of a woman recalculating in real time, searching her mental vocabulary for words that might land cleanly, only to find none. "I let you believe what was easier to believe," she finally said. "I didn't expect this to become an issue." Beside Gary, Helen let out a wordless sound, a sharp exhale through her nose. The sound of a woman having her worst fears confirmed. She set her coffee cup down hard on the table, making the spoon insides clink sharply against the porcelain. "You make us look like fools." Gary snapped into the phone. Despite his best efforts to keep it under control, his voice began to rise, the composed exterior cracking at the seams. You knew all of this, and yet you shoved us into this man's house, right into this position, letting us walk in blind. Do you even realize what this means? We're sitting here telling Arthur that things need to get back on track. And the whole time, he caught himself, pressing a hand flat against his thigh. And the whole time, it was his money keeping our normal life afloat, Gary. Chloe's voice cut back, sharp and defensive. Now is not the time to. I'll call you back later, Gary said, and hung up the phone. The living room fell completely silent. Thomas sat in the corner, saying nothing. Hands folded quietly in his lap with his phone, still face down on the side table beside him. Outside, a car crept down the gravel road, its engine sound fading away into the trees. Helen held her face in both hands, eyes brimming with tears shed out of raw humiliation rather than sorrow. I keep thinking about what I said to you last Christmas, she said to me, her voice trembling. I told you Patrick had finally stepped up. I said we were so proud of him for carrying the weight. She slowly shook her head. I had no idea I was describing your money. No, I said softly. You didn't. I said it without a trace of bitterness, and I think she heard that, because the look she gave me wasn't quite gratitude, but something very close to it. It was the look of a person being shown away out of a corner she didn't even realize she'd been backed into. Gary rested his hands on his knees, staring at the blue folder on the coffee table. It was still turned to the summary page, with my handwriting at the bottom. He looked like a man who'd driven 4 hours to deliver a sentence, only to arrive and discover the judgment had already been passed, and he was the one being sentenced. I owe you an apology, Arthur, he finally spoke. His voice was stripped of its previous authority, sounding old and uncertain underneath. Not just because my daughter put me in this position, but because I got too comfortable. We all got too comfortable. And comfortable people stop asking questions. He looked up at me. I should have asked where that money was coming from a long time ago. It wasn't an apology from a man who had truly faced up to what happened. It was the apology of a man severing ties with his daughter's choices to save whatever sliver of dignity he had left. I could see the difference, and I accepted it for what it was. I appreciate that, Gary, I said. Thomas reached over to the side table, picked up his phone, and slid it quietly into his jacket pocket. He caught my eye for a fraction of a second, giving an almost imperceptible nod, the nod of a man who got exactly what he needed. Gary and Helen stood up to leave shortly after. The visit didn't end with the resolution Gary had planned, but rather with the deflated quiet peculiar to people who had lost their defensive footing. At the door, Helen paused, looking back over the room one last time. The photos on the mantel, the open folder on the coffee table, and an ordinary man's ordinary living room. The very room and the very ordinary pension that had funded 6 years of their ordinary lives. She didn't say a word. She just looked. Then she followed Gary out toward the rental car. I stood by the window watching them back down the gravel road. Thomas appeared beside me. Holding the bottle of bourbon he'd evidently brought over in his jacket pocket. A detail I hadn't noticed until now. Well, he said, pouring 2 generous splashes into the coffee mugs on the side table. That went about how I figured. What did you figure? I asked. Thomas handed me a mug. A whole lot better for you than it did for them, he said. I reserved all of Sunday just for myself, doing nothing in particular. I fixed the latch on the workshop door that had been sticking since February. I made a pot of soup from whatever was left in the fridge, eating at the kitchen table with the radio playing low. In the evening, I called Thomas to let him know Gary and Helen had made it back to Columbus safely. He'd sent a text asking, his quiet way of checking in without making a fuss. "She'll move fast now," Thomas said. "Chloe, now that her parents know the truth." "I reckon so," I said. "You ready?" "Been ready since April 21st. I meant every word. On Monday morning, long before sunrise, I sat at my bedroom desk under the lamp with a yellow legal pad in front of me. I had spoken with a real estate attorney in Columbus by phone the previous Friday afternoon. A brief, 30-minute consultation was all it took to confirm my rights as the sole owner of the residential property under Ohio law. The attorney laid it out straight. Because Patrick and Chloe occupied the property without a formal lease agreement, they were considered month-to-month tenants under Section 5321.77 of the Ohio Revised Code. As the sole owner, I was required to give at least 30 days written notice before asking them to vacate or enter into a formal lease agreement. Certified mail was the proper method of service, creating a documented paper trail of delivery. I didn't need a lawyer to tell me what to write. I had been drafting this letter in my head since the drive home from Columbus 3 weeks ago. I kept it strictly to one page. I stated the facts plainly. I was the sole owner of the property. The current occupancy was month to month without a formal lease, and I was providing 30 days written notice from the date of service. I laid out 2 choices: vacate the property by June 12th, or contact me within 10 days to discuss a formal lease agreement at the current market rate for similar Columbus properties, which the lawyer confirmed was roughly $1,800 a month. I attached a copy of the deed. My tone stayed neutral, the sentences short, just like writing a maintenance report. Nothing that could be misread, nothing that offered room for debate. I read it through twice. Then I signed it, folded it, with the deed copy into an envelope, and drove over to the Harlan post office when it opened at 8:30. The lady behind the counter had been processing my mail for 11 years. She didn't comment on the Columbus address or the certified mail form. She handed me the green return receipt card and told me it would take 2 to 3 business days to arrive. I thanked her and drove home. I hadn't planned on visiting the cemetery. Passing the entrance on Maple Street, on my way home, as I usually did, I turned in this time. Dorothy's grave was in the older section, under a red oak tree. The tree was already large when we buried her, and it had grown even bigger since. I parked and walked across the grass, soft from the weekend rain. To the left of her headstone, a small Veterans Day flag still stood stuck in the ground. Someone from the county always came out to place flags, and not everyone remembered to pick them up right away. Nope. Dorothy would have found that charming rather than careless. I sat on the granite bench provided by the cemetery, staring at the headstone for a while. Dorothy Ann Calloway, 1957, 2018. Below that was the line I had chosen. She always knew. When I chose that inscription, I wasn't entirely sure. The funeral director had gently suggested warmer phrasing, like beloved wife and mother, or a simple rest in peace. I sat with those options for a day before coming back to those 3 words, because it was the truest thing I knew about her, and accuracy had always mattered to both of us. She knew about Chloe. She knew about the house, insisting on the deed, before she got too sick to push for anything, never offering an explanation. Because she understood I trusted her enough not to need one. She knew Patrick's particular brand of kindness toward those around him would, eventually, cost him more than he earned, and she placed the one anchor that could hold right where it needed to be, making sure it didn't cost him everything. I sat there for about 10 minutes. I didn't speak out loud like some people do at gravesides, because Dorothy never needed me to explain myself, and I saw no reason to start now. I just sat with her, in the quiet of a Monday morning, in May, oak leaves just coming in overhead, the grass wet under my boots. Before standing up to leave, I rested my hand flat on top of the headstone for a moment. The granite felt cold and solid against my palm. "You were right about the deed," I said softly. "I thought you ought to know I put it to use." I drove home, brewed fresh coffee, and sat at the kitchen table. The certified letter was on its way. It would reach Columbus on Wednesday, Thursday at the latest. Patrick would sign the receipt. He was the one who picked up the mail. I imagined his face as he opened the envelope. I imagined Chloe looking at the copy of the deed, seeing my name on it, and understanding for the first time in 8 years of marriage what that single fact truly meant. The phone on the table lit up. Patrick's name. Not a call. A text. "Dad, I got the letter. I need to call you tonight. Is that okay?" I replied. "Okay. I'll be home." I set the phone down and picked up my coffee. Wednesday night then. I had 2 days left to wait, and in my 68 years, I'd learned that waiting was never the hardest part. The hardest part was always what came to. He called at 6:47 on Wednesday evening. I was sitting alone at the kitchen table having dinner. A bowl of chili made from pantry leftovers. The radio on the counter was playing low, something I wasn't really listening to. When his name popped up on the screen, I turned off the radio and picked up on the second ring. "Dad." His voice sounded different from any of the calls he'd made to me over the last 3 weeks. Not panicked, not rehearsed, not carefully managed to control the fallout. Just tired. That specific bone-deep exhaustion of someone who had carried a heavy weight for too long and finally decided to drop it right where he stood. "I got the letter," he said. "Signed for it this afternoon." "I know," I said. "Got the delivery confirmation." A pause followed. I could hear the wind on his end. He was outside somewhere, surrounded by ambient noise. A parking lot, I figured. The background noise of a man stepping out of his own house to make a call he didn't want his wife to overhear. "Dad, I've been sitting in my car for 2 hours, Patrick said. "I drove to the grocery store and just sat in the parking lot. I couldn't bring myself to go back inside." "I understand," I said. "I don't think you fully do," he said. "There's something I need to tell you. Something that happened last week that I should have told you right away. But I didn't because I was ashamed and I didn't know how to say it." I set my spoon back in the bowl. "Go ahead, Patrick." He took a deep breath, his voice clear and deliberate. The breath of a man stepping off a ledge he could no longer step back from. "Sam asked me last Tuesday why he couldn't lay a key anymore. Said he missed you. Said Grandpa used to call every Sunday, and you hadn't called in weeks." Patrick's voice tightened around the next words, the way a throat constricts before giving out entirely. I told him I'd look into it. And then that night, after Sam went to sleep, I quietly asked Chloe about it. He stopped. The wind on the line filled the silence. "What did she say?" I asked. "She told me she'd already talked to Sam about it." Patrick's voice dropped to something raw and unstable. The sound of a man breaking down in a grocery store parking lot at 6:47 on a Wednesday evening in Columbus, Ohio. She told him Grandpa Arthur wasn't someone he needed to spend much time thinking about. Said you weren't around anymore. Said you didn't have anything to offer him. Said you were just— She used the word. She told our 10-year-old son his grandfather was irrelevant. I didn't say anything for a moment. I looked down at the bowl of chili in front of me, steam still rising, a simple dinner on a simple evening. I felt something press against my chest, not anger and not sorrow. The concentrated pain unique to a grandfather realizing the child he loved had been fed an image of him, explicitly designed to make the boy stop loving him back. Sam asked me if that was true. Patrick continued, the edges of his voice fraying completely now, no longer trying to hold together. He asked if Grandpa Arthur was irrelevant. I told him no. I told him absolutely not. And then Sam said— Patrick stopped completely. I heard him press a hand over the phone, the muffled sound of a man pulling himself back from an edge. Then he came back on. Sam said, "Then why did Mom say we shouldn't need him anymore?" The kitchen around me was dead quiet. The fridge hummed. Somewhere outside, a dog barked twice down the road, then went quiet again. "Patrick," I said. "I know," he said. "I know, Dad. I don't know when I stopped being your son and started being her accountant. I don't know when I let things drift this far. I just kept thinking it would fix itself. But it didn't. Now my kid is asking me why his grandfather is irrelevant, and I can't find an answer that doesn't make me sick to my stomach." His voice was completely broken now. Not dramatic, not for show, just the way a grown man genuinely breaks after holding on to his absolute limit. I heard him let out a heavy, long, trembling breath. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said. "I'm sorry for everything, for the money, for the silence, for letting it go on this long. I'm sorry you had to do what you did from 4 hours away. Because I wasn't man enough to do it myself." I let the silence hold for a moment before answering. Not to punish him with it, but because some things need room before the next words are spoken. "Patrick," I said, "what do you want to do now?" He went quiet for a few seconds. When he answered, his voice had dropped back from the edge of breaking, growing quieter and more reflective. The tone of a man who stopped performing and started thinking. "I want to be someone Sam won't be ashamed of someday," he said. "I don't know exactly how to start, but I know I want to start." "That's enough," I said. "A good start is enough." He asked if he could call again tomorrow. I told him he could. I told him to get out of the parking lot and find something to eat, because a man couldn't think straight on an empty stomach. It was the most practical help I knew how to offer him right then. At that, he almost let out a laugh, a tiny sound, thin and uncertain, but real. After hanging up, I sat at the table for a long time. The chili in front of me had gone cold. I thought about the 10-year-old boy with the gap-toothed smile, asking his father if his grandfather was irrelevant. And I thought about the father who told him no. That no stood for something. It wasn't enough just yet, but it stood for something. On a Saturday morning 3 days after the parking lot call, I was watering a small garden patch on the south side of the house, the one Dorothy started, which I kept going every spring since. My phone rang with an unfamiliar number, Columbus area code, but not Patrick's and not Chloe's. I turned off the hose and picked up. "Mr. Calloway," a woman's voice came through, professional and unhurried. "This is Rebecca Marsh from the law firm of Delaney and Marsh in Columbus. I'm calling on behalf of my client, Chloe Baxter Calloway. She filed for dissolution of marriage on Thursday. As part of the asset disclosure process, I need to verify the ownership status of the residential property located at 4714 Elmwood Avenue in Columbus, Ohio." I sat down on the porch step. A robin was busy in the flower bed I'd just watered, intently pulling something from the soft earth. "The property at that address belongs to me," I said. "Arthur Raymond Calloway. I am the sole owner. I purchased it in October of 2017. My name is the only name on the deed. Can you confirm it was never transferred, jointly registered, or leveraged as collateral in any mortgage or loan arrangement involving Patrick Calloway or Chloe Baxter Calloway?" "I can confirm all of that," I said. "The property has belonged strictly to me personally. If it helps, I can send a copy of the deed to your office today." "That would be very helpful, Mr. Calloway," Miss Marsh said. "Thank you for your time." She ended the call with the official politeness of someone with 5 more calls to make before lunch. I sat on the porch step for a moment with the phone in my hand while the robin kept busy in the flower bed. I imagined Chloe sitting in some office in Columbus on Thursday morning, putting her name to a dissolution petition, believing she'd walk away with something. I also imagined the precise moment her attorney ran the property title search and got back a deed bearing only my name instead of her husband's. 11 minutes later, Patrick called. He was staying at a friend's apartment, a guy named Carl he'd worked with at the warehouse for 6 years. Carl gave up his couch after Patrick laid out enough of the truth to explain why he couldn't go home. "She filed for divorce on Thursday," Patrick said. "I found out yesterday when her lawyer called my lawyer. I don't even have a lawyer yet." Carl's wife gave me a name, someone who specializes in family law and charges reasonable rates. I set an appointment for Monday. "Good," I said. "Dad," she took Sam to her parents' place. "Gary and Helen's apartment." He paused. "I let her. I want you to know that was my choice, not something she forced. Sam needs a stable spot right now. Whatever else they are, Gary and Helen's place is at least stable. I can't offer him stability right now sleeping on a couch." I appreciated him saying that. It showed Patrick making an accurate, honest assessment of his situation, something he wasn't capable of 3 weeks ago, but clearly was now. "Have you talked to Sam?" I asked. "Called him this morning." He picked up on the first ring. Patrick's voice changed, not broken like in the parking lot, but softer. He asked if everything was going to be okay. I told him things were going to be different. And different and okay aren't the same thing, but they aren't opposites either. A brief pause. "I think he got it. He's a smart kid." "He is," I said. "Takes after his grandmother." Patrick went quiet for a moment. In the silence, I could hear him taking in the easy tone. The first thing resembling a normal conversation between us since Easter. "Dad, when the divorce settles, lawyer thinks it'll be relatively straightforward since there's nothing to split. I'll need a place to stay. I've been looking at apartments near the warehouse. A 1-bedroom on Parsons Avenue for $650 a month. I figure I can manage that on my current pay if I take on weekend overtime." "Sounds like a plan," I said. "I asked about a second job too," he said. "A logistics company on the south side runs night freight Friday and Saturday. Applied yesterday. They said they'd let me know by Tuesday." He stopped. "I know that doesn't make up for what happened. I know $650 a month and Friday night freight don't even make a dent in $216,000. But I want to start." "Starting is the whole point," I said. "Starting is everything right now." He asked what I planned to do with the Columbus house. I told him I hadn't decided yet, which wasn't entirely true. I'd been turning it over in my mind since signing those cancellation papers at First Heartland Bank, but I wanted to see the property in person before making any commitments. I told him I'd drive up once things settled down to a manageable level. All right, Patrick said. He sounded more grounded than he had in weeks. Not fully recovered. That would take much longer than 3 weeks. But he'd found his direction and had a goal in sight. After we hung up, I went back out to the garden and resumed watering. The robin was gone. The soil in the south bed looked dark and smooth, just the way Dorothy liked to see it in the spring. Well-tilled, uncompacted, and ready for whatever came next. I stood there holding the hose for a moment, looking over the garden, wondering what the next step was for all of us. Then I coiled the hose up, put it away, and went inside to call Thomas. She filed, I told him when he picked up. "How's Patrick holding up?" he asked. "Finding his footing," I said. Thomas went quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That boy's going to be all right, Arthur." "I think so too," I said. "I think so too." At 9 o'clock on Sunday morning, I left Harlan with a thermos of coffee and a folded sheet of paper in my shirt pocket. That paper wasn't a legal document. I'd written it out by hand at the kitchen table the night before, using the same tight cursive I'd used on work orders and maintenance logs for 35 years. I hadn't consulted anyone on its contents because what it contained wasn't a contract. It was a list of things a father was asking his son to do. I intended to make clear to him, when handing it over, that the distinction between the two mattered a great deal to me. The drive-up offered 4 hours of early summer countryside in May. The hills had turned fully green now, under a wide, pale blue sky. The kind of sky Ohio gets when the weather finally decides to yield to the season. I sipped my coffee and skipped the radio, thinking about what I wanted to say. More importantly, thinking about what I didn't want to say. Because there was a chance this conversation could turn into a reckoning, and I didn't want a reckoning. I wanted something that would last longer than that. At 1:15, as I pulled into the Schiller Park parking lot, Patrick was waiting for me on a bench near the east entrance. He sat with hands hanging loosely between his knees, elbows resting on them, staring down the path ahead. The still posture of someone who had been sitting in one spot so long he stopped noticing his surroundings. A paper coffee cup sat on the bench beside him, long since empty. Hearing my boots crunch on the gravel path, he looked up and stood. No rushed movements, no staged relief. Just standing up the way you do when the person you've actually been waiting for arrives. He looked tired. A good kind of tired. I thought, the tired that comes after finally dropping a heavy load, rather than from carrying it. "Dad." He extended his hand, then seemed to rethink it, pulling me into a brief embrace instead. His shoulders felt thinner than I remembered. We sat together on the bench, a foot of space between us. The park moved quietly around us. A woman pushing a stroller down a path, 2 boys tossing a frisbee on the grass. A dog straining on its leash toward something in the bushes. "How's Carl's couch?" I asked. Patrick almost smiled. "It's a couch," he said. "Carl's wife makes good coffee, so that helps." "Hear back about the freight job?" "Not yet. They said Tuesday." He spun his empty paper cup in his hands. "I think I've got a good shot at it. The dispatcher mentioned they needed people with clean driving records. And at least I've got that going for me. Still got that much." Reaching into my shirt pocket, I pulled out the folded sheet of paper, holding on to it for a moment before handing it over. "Before you read this, I want to say a few things. This isn't a legal document. I didn't draft it with a lawyer. It isn't enforceable in any court. And I don't intend for it to be. This is a list of things I'm asking you to do, because I believe they'll help you build something that actually lasts. The difference between a contract and a commitment is that a contract stays around when the relationship breaks. A commitment only works if the relationship exists. I'm betting on our relationship. Patrick took the paper, unfolding it carefully, the way a person unfolds something they know, carries weight without needing to be told. He read it, without saying a word. 4 items, each written clearly in my handwriting, each carrying a specific, reachable condition. 1. Find a second job within 30 days. 2. Return $500 a month to my retirement account, starting the first full month you have 2 incomes. Not because of the dollar amount, but because habits matter. 3. Meet with Douglas Vance at First Heartland Bank within 60 days to set up a personal budget and savings plan with no other names attached. 4. Consult a family law attorney, the one Carl's wife recommended, about your parental rights regarding Sam. That consultation is arranged and funded by you. I won't pay for it, but I will support any arrangement that keeps Sam in both our lives. Patrick read through it twice. His jaw worked, tightening and relaxing. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a pen. A plain ballpoint, the kind you find at the bottom of a work bag, and signed his name at the bottom of the page beneath the list. He didn't ask me to add a thing. He didn't negotiate a single term. He simply handed it back. I folded it up and placed it back in my shirt pocket, right where it started. I thought about Dorothy sitting at the notary's desk back in 2017, wearing that nice blue cardigan, signing her name next to mine on the deed for the house in this city. I thought about how the things worth keeping always come down to a signature and the intention behind it. "Dad," Patrick said, watching the boys with the frisbee, the stroller and the ordinary Sunday afternoon slipping by. "That toy train I bought Sam. I mean, the toy train you gave Sam for Easter." He corrected himself without prompting, and I caught it. "He kept it. He sleeps with it. Chloe tried to put it in the donation box twice, but he hid it under his mattress both times." I looked out over the park. The dog slipped its leash for a second, happily running a big circle until its owner caught up, laughing. "He'll be all right," I said. "Yeah," Patrick said. "I think so, too." We sat there for another 20 minutes talking about nothing in particular. Carl's apartment complex, the freight company's route schedules, whether the apartment on Parsons Avenue allowed dogs. Patrick thought Sam might like a dog later, once things settled down. The conversation of 2 people working their way back toward normal, after being away from it for a long time. When I stood up to leave, Patrick stood up with me. We shook hands properly, this time, the way men do when an agreement is made and both sides understand it. "Call me Tuesday when you hear about the job," I said. "I will," he said. "Dad, thank you. Not just for the paper, but for making the drive up." I gave his hand a squeeze before letting go. I walked back to my truck in the afternoon light. The folded paper sitting in my shirt pocket, the park behind me still filled with the sound of an ordinary Sunday. A 4-hour drive back to Harlan. I had one more thing to take care of in Columbus before this was done. But not today. Today was enough. The night before, Patrick texted me to say he'd left the house keys back in the lockbox by the front door, having cleared out the last of his things by 6 o'clock. Thursday evening. He was thorough about it. That's what he said, and I believed him. Because when Patrick focused on the right things, thoroughness was always a quality he possessed. He also hired professionals to clean the carpets without being asked, leaving a check drawn from his personal account on the kitchen counter to cover the final month's utilities. I drove up Friday morning, leaving Harlan before sunrise with coffee in my thermos. I rolled the window down a crack because the June air through the mountains of eastern Kentucky was still cool before 7 in the morning. No. By the time I crossed into Ohio, the sun was fully up, the fields along the interstate lush and green, showing the settled calm that comes when early summer growth takes hold. At 9:40 a.m., I pulled up in front of the house at 4714 Elmwood Avenue, sitting in the truck for a moment just looking at it. Weeds still choked the flower beds by the porch. The left side gutter still hung loose from the fascia board. Nobody had fixed it in the 4 months since Easter. Nobody was going to fix it now either, because that was going to be a problem to solve before and to be my problems before listing the property for sale. I made a mental note and stepped out of the truck. The house was quiet, carrying that specific silence of a place that's been emptied out. Not quite peaceful, just held in suspension. The furniture was gone. The art Chloe hung was gone, leaving light rectangles on the walls. Aside from Patrick's check, the kitchen counters were bare. I folded the check and slipped it into my jacket pocket. The fridge sat empty, door propped open, a few inches the way you leave it when you're done using it. I walked through every room slowly, the way I'd inspected engine rooms for 35 years. Methodical, top to bottom, left to right, looking for what needed attention and what could be left alone. A scratch ran across the living room floor near the fireplace from dragging something heavy. The second bathroom drained slow, needing a plumber. The back bedroom that used to be Chloe's home office had a hole in the drywall near the baseboard. Small, but clearly intentional. The kind of damage that announces itself as deliberate rather than accidental. I stood in the doorway of that room, looking at the hole for a moment. Then I added it to the mental list and kept moving. Sam's room sat at the end of the hallway. I pushed the door open and walked in. It was the smallest bedroom in the house, the one catching the morning light through an east-facing window. Patrick told me Sam picked it himself when they first moved in, because he said it felt like waking up inside the sun. The walls were still, the light yellow. Sam picked out from color, swatches spread across the kitchen table when he was 4 years old. Dorothy had suggested letting him choose during one of her better days near the end of her life. The room stood empty. The small bookshelf was gone. The rug with the rocket ships was gone. The glow-in-the-dark star stickers stayed on the ceiling because you couldn't pull them off without taking the paint with them. I was glad they were still there, being the most honest thing left in the house. Just as I turned to leave, I saw it. Behind the door, partially blocked by the hinge side, completely hidden unless the door opened all the way. A piece of paper taped to the wall with 3 strips of clear tape, the edges yellowed and dry. The paper was slightly wrinkled from humidity, corners curling, but the tape held firm. I pulled the door all the way open and looked at it. A crayon drawing, done with the deep obsession of a child who didn't yet know how to hold back on color. 2 figures stood side by side against a scribbled background of green grass and blue sky, with a yellow sun in the corner radiating light like wagon spokes. The taller figure wore what looked like a brown jacket, with gray hair drawn in strong horizontal lines. The smaller figure wore a red shirt with brown hair. Between them, held up by 2 pairs of tiny hands at the same time, was an unmistakable shape. A rectangle with wheels and a smokestack, colored in green and gold. At the bottom, written, in the earnest block letters of a child who just learned that letters make words and words make things real. Sam had written, "Me and Grandpa Arthur." I stood in the doorway of that room for a long time. I am not a man who cries easily. I made it through Dorothy's illness, her passing, and the year that followed, without breaking down in front of anyone. Not because my heart wasn't broken, but because that's just how I am. Some things get processed inside the body, rather than showing on the face. I will say, though, that yellow room with the stars on the ceiling and the crayon drawing behind the door asked something of me I wasn't prepared for. I stood right there and let it ask, giving it everything it needed. Then I carefully peeled the tape from the wall, starting at the top corner. Moving slow so the paper wouldn't tear, it came away intact. I folded it gently once along the natural crease in the wrinkled paper and slipped it into my shirt pocket, right next to where that folded list of conditions sat last week. Right against my heart. The way you carry things that need to be kept safe. I walked back through the house to the front door. Pulling it shut behind me, I locked it, using the key from the lockbox. I stood on the porch for a moment, looking out over Elmwood Avenue. The neighbors' yards, parked cars, an ordinary residential street in an ordinary Columbus neighborhood. It had been part of my life for 8 years, and, now, it was about to stop being that. Standing on the porch, I called the real estate agent. She'd been waiting for my call. We discussed the timeline last week. She said she could send someone over to assess within 10 days and have the listing ready before the end of the month. I told her to go ahead. Sliding my phone into my pocket, I walked to my truck. Sitting behind the wheel, I pulled the drawing out of my shirt pocket, unfolding it carefully to look at it once more in the morning light. The green and gold locomotive, the two figures, side by side, the block letters at the bottom. Me and Grandpa Arthur. I folded it back up and put it in my pocket. I started the engine. A 4-hour drive back to Harlan, back to the house that had always been mine. Back to the workshop, the garden, the road out front. Back to Thomas, sitting on his porch across the way with his coffee mug, carrying the unhurried patience of a man who had waited 20 years and was prepared to wait a little longer. The pension money that had been drawn from my account on the first of every month for the last 6 years was staying right in my account this month. Next month, too. And the month after that. I pulled away from the curb without looking back. It's January now. The roof is holding steady. Thomas still comes over for coffee on Saturday mornings. Patrick called last week to say Sam wants to video chat on Sunday. Apparently, he has a few questions about whether dinosaurs could drive locomotives, and I plan to take that question very seriously. I spent 6 years footing the bill for a version of my life that never truly belonged to me. I let generosity turn into silence. Silence into entitlement. And entitlement into $216,000 flowing out of my account without a single honest conversation along the way. Don't do what I did. Ask the hard questions early. Love isn't a blank check. And the people who treat it like one are telling you exactly how they view the hand holding the pen. I believe life gives us moments of clarity, disguised as difficult dinners. That Easter Sunday was my moment of clarity. I'm grateful for it. Family justice doesn't always look like a courtroom. Sometimes, it looks like a 68-year-old man sitting in a banker's office on a Monday morning, taking his own name back. This isn't a story about revenge. This is simply what happens when a person finally decides to believe what they're being shown. If this story touched you, drop a comment and tell me where you watched it tonight. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. Thank you for staying with me to the end.